Number 16, at this time, we have a presentation from Mr. Ralph Cross and Phyllis regarding our water and sewer system. They're going to give us an update. We've had to do this regarding the rate study, and we're going to turn this over to them to give us the most adequate information they can give us.
Yes. Due to the financial status of the Water and Sewer Fund and letters from the State Wastewater Board, the board has recently asked for a utility rate study. As we all know, the city of Vergne has not had a rate change since the mid to late 90s. The board chose MTAS to participate in the study due to their expertise in this area, because this is something that they do very well. And Ralph Cross with MTAS has spearheaded this study, and will present tonight his findings and recommendations. And with that said, I'd like to introduce Ralph Cross and have him come up and do his presentation.
Thank you, Phyllis. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Board, Mayor, and Aldermen. It's nice to be with you tonight. I would like to express my appreciation to Phyllis and her staff, and to Bruce. They've been very helpful in providing information to make this analysis much easier. There's a lot of information to pull together, to look at, to try to make an evaluation of where you stand. As we enter into this presentation, you have challenges before you, and the Water and Wastewater Board is asking you to have this review prepared to give you insight into your challenges. In addition to the plan tonight, we'll be talking a variety of things. Are all of you familiar with MTAS? Are you know where we are? I'm Ralph Cross. I'm a finance and accounting consultant. I work in the Nashville area. I teach classes. I do finance consulting and also do utility rate studies. As we embarked upon this presentation, wanted to identify the mission, and we want to prepare a multi-year financial analysis of the water and sewer utilities. We want to consider the financial impact of implementing a capital improvement plan. You've got an aggressive capital improvement plan. This is part of this presentation that we'll be talking about. It's integral in terms of defining where you are and where you're going to have a good understanding of the capital investment needs you have, because that affects your income, it affects your cash flow. We want to evaluate the cost of debt and depreciation associated with this capital improvement plan. How much money does it cost to implement? Do you have enough money in revenue, or do we have to borrow some money? That was another consideration that I have included in this evaluation. And in addition to that, we want to project the water and sewer rates it's going to need to operate the utility on a sound financial basis. So where do we start? First thing we need to look at is what the state looks at. The state is asking you to make sure, as part of their laws of compliance, that you have positive total net assets, that you have positive change in net assets, and that you're able to pay your bonded debt. So that's where we're going to begin for you. As we start looking at this, the Wastewater Facilities Act of 1987, it says that created a board to oversee financially distressed water and wastewater systems. And I'm afraid that you fit that category, and that's why we're having this meeting. Financial distress, 2 consecutive years of negative change in net assets, or a deficit in total net assets, or default on debt. You have not defaulted on debt. You have positive net assets, but you have some changes in the net assets that are creating some concerns of that Water and Wastewater Board. When you are declared distressed, you must present a plan that's going to address that distress and work your way out of it over time. When we start evaluating, I began with pulling together some financial statements from the past so that we have a trend, looking at what has happened over the past couple of years, looking at your current budget and how that factors in, and then I make projections to the future. The first thing we have is showing up is a large negative change in net assets in your fiscal year 2008-2009. It's due to the increase in cost of operations. There was an increase in your cost. There's also a recognition of a special item. A special item is something unusual that doesn't happen too often. And in this case, a legal judgment of $650,000 is in your audit. In addition to that, there's a restatement of the net assets in recognition of the change in your perception of how much that exposure you have with the impact of the change in the sewer rate settlement. So we have, after we deal with that larger change in net assets, we have negative change in net assets over the next couple of years. As you'll see, there's that large change in net assets, $2,857,000. You got $500,000 associated with that rate recognition on the sewer rate, and several $100,000 associated with the legal settlement. Then the next year, in 2009, we have a negative $1,400,000 and an aggressive negative change of $1,494,000. This in itself would carry you into this distressed evaluation by the Water and Wastewater Department. Well, I mentioned before, your total net assets are positive in that we have $42 million, but that is declining because the change in net assets are declining as time goes along. When we start looking at the financial review, we see the revenue is not growing. As a matter of fact, it's declining according to your audited financial statements. Your operating expenses increased $1 million between 2007, 8, and 2008 and 9, and operating income is showing a consistent loss. So if we look at 2007-8, our audit, the 2008-09 audit, and the 2009-10 audit, revenues are flat, even declining a bit. As we look at our operating expenses, 6.4, 7.5, 7.4 again in terms of our operating expenses. Obviously, if expenses exceed revenues, we're going to have negative income. So there's no money from revenues that are making it into the coffers so that you can save it or spend it for other things. We're actually losing money. What about debt service? The utilities debt service, looking at evaluation of your scheduled debt in your financial report, it seems to remain consistent throughout fiscal year 2016, which is the study period we're looking at. So there's no significant change in the level of amount of money that you're spending on debt, even though the principal is beginning to climb, because as debt matures and you pay more of the principal off, the composition of your principal and interest becomes more principal as interest begins to decline. This part is part of your operating, non-operating costs that you deal with on the, we used to call it an income statement. It's not quite that anymore, but for discussion purposes, income statement is good enough. We deal with this as expenses. When we deal with this, these are reduction in liabilities on the balance sheet. If we're looking at our water and sewer sales revenue, metered sales and sewer charges, not all the other miscellaneous revenue, not the rent or anything else in there, we're just looking at the sales of water and sewer. Principal and interest represent $1.5 million of our 5.7 in revenue. So 73% of our revenue is available for spending for operations, where 27% is dedicated to the reduction of debt. That's not a bad ratio, but as we talk about the capital improvement plan, that ratio will change as the revenue that we need to have changes. So this ratio, whenever you start seeing the ratio of principal and interest to your sales revenue over 25%, you need to be concerned that you're not getting too upside down in terms of your revenues going toward the retirement of debt. Non-operating revenue is not offsetting your non-operating expense. What am I talking about? We have operating expense, which is the revenues less the operating expense. Then we have another section of the audit which deals with non-operating revenues and non-operating expenses. Basically, non-operating revenues are our interest earnings, rent, things that are not related to sales of sewer service or water service. The next situation is the expense portion is our interest expense on debt. So our non-operating revenue and debt, we're seeing negative numbers there. Tap fees are not, which were stronger in 2007 and 8, are starting to decline the next 2 years, and that recognition of the legal judgment and the dispute recognition shows up in the audit at this point. So non-operating revenues, this number right here, that's the difference in the interest earned and the interest paid. Difference in interest earned, interest paid primarily. So you can see that we're not adding to the coffers with our operating income, and then we're having to pay interest on our bonded debt, which makes the situation worse. So our income, or in parentheses, loss, before contributions and transfers, we've gone from losing $300,000 in 2007-8 to $1.7 million in 2009 and 10. This situation is not improving. We do have tap fees. As I mentioned, tap fees were fairly strong in 2007-8, but they're falling off. They're half what they were. Development has slowed down over the past couple of years. And there's our special item, our legal judgment, $650,000 is recognized by the auditor as a liability against the sewer system. So changes in net assets, their assets were $327,000 in terms of changes of the first year. There's a $2,200,000 swing in 2008-9, another $1,414,000 swing in 2009, and these are represented by the graphs I showed you a little earlier in that change in net assets. When we recognize that restatement of the sewer adjustment, the restatement that was in the audit was $2,857,000 negative change in 2008 and 9. Well, income is falling, operating expenses rise, debt obligations remain constant. Where's the money coming from to help us make ends meet? It's coming from our cash reserves. This is a graphical representation of the black line representing their operating revenues. This is all the revenues that we've got that are dealing with the operations. This is our operating expenses and the non-operating expenses. So as we pay more in interest than we earn, it contributes to the losses. So our expenses are here, our revenues are there. This green line represents the amount of money that we would be earning if it was over the zero, but this is below the zero, so we are losing here. This is representing the money that we're losing between our operations, including the interest expense we're paying. Now, even though we've got a negative situation here in terms of our income, we still have to deal with capital improvements to the system. We've got operations to pay. We can't stop making water. Everyone, when individuals want and turn that knob at home, they want to have clean water coming out. They want to get rid of it when they don't need it anymore. So we're going to have operations continuing. The assets are wearing out. They have to be looked at, replaced, and evaluated. Here's our proposed capital projects that's been submitted by the department. This is an aggressive schedule. It's $2 million in 11-12, $635,000 in water, $1.5 million in sewer, $3 million in water in 12-13, $1.5 million in sewer, and so on. As you see, $2 million, $4.5 million, $5 million, $5 million, $2 million in plant improvements. And then there's capital that's needed for equipment for water and sewer and billing, $300,000 roughly the first couple of years and a couple $100,000 a year thereafter. So we're dealing with operations. Our stuff is wearing out. It's needing to be replaced. You have capital needs too. This is not helping whenever there's no money coming into the utilities coffers, and you've got these kind of needs as well. So you've got the operations cost, you've got cash flow needs associated with this. When we talk about the income, depreciation is an operating cost. You don't pay anyone depreciation. Depreciation is like when you go and you buy a car, whenever you drive it off the lot, it's not worth as much as it was whenever you bought it. Why? It's used. So as you use it, we start seeing the cost and the value begins to decline with use. So currently, your current depreciation from your audit is $1.7 million. Well, as we implement this capital project, our cost of operation are going to increase because we will be using this new equipment that will increase our cost of use. So we'll be seeing our cost of operation increase $80,000 to $200,000 to $354,000 and so on as these dollars become reflective, an accounting entry, a recognition of the use of those assets. Now that money's not going anywhere. It's still in the bank. That's the good news. This money is being earned, it's being accounted for to represent the use of your system, and it's set back so that you can invest it in the system again. These rates that we're talking about will have to pay for this because this is consideration of that change of net assets that the state is very concerned about. Well, what are our assumptions? Capital projects, in order for us to forecast into the future, we had to identify where we were. We had to see what the condition is now. We had to see what the condition of our capital assets are and what we need to be bringing to the table. We need to look at the depreciation that is going to be generated from the installation of these capital projects. And then we start thinking that everything costs more tomorrow than it costs today. So salaries going up, benefits going up, other costs going up. we've got projections of these salaries of 3%, benefits going up at 15%, and other costs going up at 3%. Is that accurate? It's a close guess. What's going to happen? We really don't know. What's happening with gasoline? Gasoline affects a lot of different things. We're seeing the price go up, delivery costs go up, food costs go up, all kinds of things are going up. But this is a representation of trying to put together some entry into the model to recognize that costs are going to be more for next year. We can't project any growth in the water. Over the last 3 years, we haven't seen any growth. So there's not going to be new, unless a new business comes in or we have a population surge, we're not going to see any growth in that system, or new ratepayers coming into our system. So we have no revenues increases applied in the water and sewer for this first case. We've got to see what's going to happen if we don't address this at all. So here we are. This is an expansion of the graph I just showed you. We currently have, our expenses are currently above our operating revenues now. So we have negative income. In 2008-9, it got worse. In 2009-10, it stayed basically the same relationship. Using your budget figures this year and the revenues that are projected for the course of the year, we're seeing a slight increase in revenues projected for this year, but expenses may go up too. So we're still seeing the balancing act between the revenues and the costs are still below in the negative territory. And it stays there. It just gets worse. Revenues remaining flat and expenses going up, there's no place for our net income but to decline further. Well, of course, this is a cash flow that represents what's happening with that capital plan, and after this it won't matter. The rest of this won't matter after next year. So what are we going to do? If our capital projects move forward as proposed and our expenses grow as previously noted, the rate increases that we need to make as soon as possible, and I've got in the model May 1st. If you could do it sooner than that, it's better. The more money that you start generating, the better. But we got a 40% water increase and a 60% sewer increase, and then after that, annually, 3% and 6% rate increases over time to help control growth. This is required to get out of the hole. And then these are going to help you maintain a positive relationship between the operating costs and expenses. As a result, revenue increases, our change in net assets turn positive, and total net assets begin to grow instead of decline. That's a different graph than we were looking at before. Now we're looking at, now this is a big jump, but it has to come up and out of that negative territory into the positive. And so we're seeing a positive relationship now between revenue and costs, and our income is above zero. Now this is running about $1.5 million. Now we have an increase in revenues are providing us money that is returning to the operations, that's going into the checking account. But what happens when we start figuring in that $20 million capital plan? Well, cash has helped for a little while, but the implementation of these capital projects, you're still in the hole for $6 or $8 million. Well, how do we deal with this? A suggestion is to borrow $8.8 million. In 2012-13, I projected a 4% rate of financing over 15 years. Were you to do this, you're of course adding more pressure because you have interest payments to cover, and in your cash flow you have principal payments to cover in addition to your current debt. But by doing this, you're picking up approximately $300,000 a year in interest, $343,000, $325,000. The first year I've got half, and considering that you borrow the money in January, half the interest will be covered the first year, and then the full interest payments the next 2 years, or the next 14 years or 15 years, and then principal payments running about $440,000 to $457,000. It's going to increase over time. The interest will fall off the principal, matching that level term, much like you have with your current debt. The $1.5 million, $1.1 million, $1.145,000, that's what is in your current schedule. Your interest is running about $500,000, declining over the study period, and we're picking up and adding a little bit more interest here, that would be your new principal and interest graph, with picking up some of the interest in 2012-13, picking up the principal and interest for these next 3 years. And this is only a partial graph, keeping in mind that's a 15-year debt instrument we're talking about. Because you're talking about long-lived assets that you're buying with this debt. So 15 years is going to will be paid off long before the assets themselves are depreciated, because the assets we're talking about, for the most part, are running 30 to 40-year assets. The capital on the equipment is not. That's more like 10 years. But on average, the assets are running long lives, so your debt will be paid off a long time before the assets wear out. If we do this suggestion, we have positive change in net assets as before. We show positive total net assets. We have revenue from sales to increase the growth in annual operating expenses, growth in depreciation from capital improvements, and we can pay the interest on the existing debt and principal payments on the new debt. The only change is in this year of 2013 that you need just a little bump in that growth because of the impact of the new debt issues. This is going to provide you with these positive changes to your revenue over your expenses. You're going to have positive income. You're going to have enough money for the capital projects and to pay your principal and maintain a balance of $1,500,000 in the city's utility. If you start looking at the percentages, we're staking and talking with Phyllis, we're staying with the same rate structure. What was the first 2,000 gallons on residential rate, that rate increase would go to $13.33. Thereafter, the 246 would go to $3.44 per 1,000 gallons. The 1159 outside would go to $16.23. 302 per 1,000 gallons existing for the next 4,000 would go to $4.23. 431 for the next 1,000 gallons would go to $6.03. Sewer inside, $11.73 current, would go to $18.77. You've got to overcome those judgments against the sewer, so that we're looking at a little bit more cost associated with the sewer in the increases than in the water. Commercial rate, $12.32 to $17.25. Thereafter, $2.80 to $3.92 per 1,000. $15.18 for the first 2,000 for sewer. $24.29. $3.45 for the next 1,000. $5.52 per 1,000 thereafter. Industrial rate, $2.24 minimum currently to $3.13.60. $3.75 per 1,000 goes to $5.25 per 1,000. $2.76 currently to $4.41.60. $3.85 per 1,000 goes to $6.16 per 1,000. The state is going to insist that you have positive change in net assets, that you have positive total net assets, and that you fund your debt service. That's the requirements of the law. So in order for you to do that, this recommended rate increase will provide you that necessary revenue to accomplish those requirements and to fund an aggressive capital plan. But in order to do the plan, in addition to the rate increases, you've got to issue some more debt. Now, what do you think will happen if you don't implement the full capital improvement plan? These numbers are going to change because depreciation will change. If you don't want to borrow as much money, you need to review your capital plan and prioritize. If you wish, any change that you make will take this projection and it will be off. So we recommend an annual review as you close the year each year. We can look at it to see how you are stacking up with projections, how the expenses are going, how your revenues are going, how the capital plan is going. As you've seen, there's a lot of players associated with this study. As you add capital equipment, your depreciation changes. As you add capital equipment, your cash flow needs change. As you increase rate, as consumption changes, that's going to make a difference in how these revenues play out. MTAS currently is not charging for rate studies. That's probably going to change in the short term. So right now, this study does not cost you anything. So it doesn't affect you, it doesn't hurt you at all in the presentation to this point. But this is very sensitive to these increases and these percentages. So I would recommend to you that if you don't like the rate, if you don't like the revenue increases we're talking about, you've got to go back in and reduce expenses. You've got to change the capital plan. And I'll be glad to help you analyze that if you need to make some changes and want to look at it a different way. But this is one solution that I'm presenting to you. And you need to take a solution to the board in July, as I understand. Do you have any questions?
And what you need to help me express to these, if we don't make these changes in July, the state comptroller, they will start making changes for us. Because we are already in that 2-year, actually we're going into 3 years. So if we don't step up and start showing some type of effort, they will step in, to my understanding, and set the rates for us in the water.
They have the power to do that. Mm-hmm. And they're very serious about you suggesting a plan that's workable. Mm-hmm. This is one solution that will get you into, I think, a positive cash flow, sound financial system position in terms of your water and wastewater utility. And it will fund this $20 million or so capital improvement program for water and sewer. It's very important that you do something, mm-hmm. and you do something right away.
Guys, if you have any questions, please.
I don't know what to ask. What can we do?
You know what you can say, we're kind of stuck with it.
Gotta have.
We're definitely going to have to act, just since we came together as a board. I think it's something like 200,000 in the hole that we've gone, and it's going to continue. Going to have to do something. I say we do it sooner better than later.
Metro continuing to go up, I mean.
They're gonna continue.
The processing, it's a difficult time to be dealing with a situation like this. You're not the only utilities dealing with this. Other utilities not too far from you are dealing with the same pressures. They're having the same issues. And as you evaluate your cost of operation, you don't have a choice of being profitable. You have some choices of how you construct or how you implement certain recommendations, but you need engineering. You've got to engineer and maintain the system you have. A lot of systems put in place with grant money in the past, there's very little more grant money available. There's state revolving funds. There's certain areas that are competitive that you may be able to find better deals, but you have to consider your situation and try to provide for the welfare of your community. Your water and sewer system is a very integral part of your community. Well, I would like to say it's been my pleasure to be with you. I wish I was here to tell you something that you could clap for, but unfortunately, this is a very somber situation, but I'm hopeful I've been helpful. If you have additional questions in the future, if you'll let Phyllis know, and I'll be glad to try to respond to those. And if you want to revisit some of this and reprioritize, I'll be glad to work that in. I don't know how quickly I can do it because I have 2 studies after this one that I'm in the process of working those now, so we'll work it out. We'll try to get you a plan together before you go to the board. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.